Mike Owens here. Today I'm joined by Brian Campbell, one half of the award-winning Morning Combat, and I believe the captain or CEO or whatever he is of Connecticut. Brian, always pleased to down and chat. How are things for you today?
The king of CTE. It's your choice. No, great to be back with you, Mike Owens Media, one of the highest flyers, biggest risers in this MMA media space. I appreciate chatting with you, and I saw you remotely down in Austin. So continued great work to you as you make things happen out there with Team Font.
Just following in the footsteps. Unfortunately, we didn't get the win, but we got a lot of victories out of that trip, which is all that matters. But anyway,
Absolutely.
we look at UFC 296 for today's preview show, Brian. One of the most stacked cards of the year. I know you've been a man who's been very critical of UFC matchmaking
True.
across 2023, more on the fight night level than the pay-per-view level, I must say. But when you look at this final pay-per-view card of the year, give me a rating out of
Yeah,
10.
yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to give it a very, very solid B plus, and I don't say that disrespectfully. This card is deep, which is what you want, or at least what I'm looking for as a fan. I know it's weird. It's like I want one or the other. Sometimes I was one of the only people that defended the original MSG NYC plan of John Jones versus Stipe under the guise at the time of like, sometimes you've got to reach big for the casuals, do the historically important fights, even if it's not necessarily falling in line with the meritocracy of who's next. But I also love me these type of hardcore, deep cards up and down where UFC 296 is offering me for my fandom, what, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 fights that I really want to see. How many of those are must see? A lot of them. And I think that's the best way to say it. I don't know if B plus seems a little bit too harsh, but I think the only thing this card is lacking is really just that the big name, the big crossover name. And you could say to yourself, if I'm a hardcore fan, why does that matter? Sometimes I guess I'm making these statements through the lens of combat sports media budgets at websites. And sometimes, when I'm looking to even pitch myself to go to some of these big events and I've got a boss looking at the travel budget, if they don't see big names on the marquee that they recognize, sometimes it's hard for me to get out there. So sometimes I use that as a judgment. This doesn't have those big crossover names, but boy, top to bottom, do you have interesting matchups, people you want to see. I just can't figure out like which fight I'm most excited for at the end of the day. Did you have one picked out, Mike?
I have a few vested interests with a couple of Brits and an Irishman on the card. So naturally, there's the certain allegiances. Obviously, when you cover the sport, there's always allegiances. I've interviewed Raw Dog a couple of times, who I know I think that was your first outing with a couple of days ago. He's a character. Vicente Luque
Sure.
is obviously a friend of mine. So it's a good card up and down. Obviously, very interested in the Paddy Pimblett versus Tony Ferguson fight for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and that's an interesting fight because you can't figure out if that's going to be an absolute sad train wreck or the perfect resuscitation that Paddy needs, especially if it comes in the form of like a surprisingly competitive fight until he wins it, or maybe the most exciting old guy does well, makes good wins since the ultimate reference point, which was that Tito Ortiz upset of Ryan Bader a bunch of years back in the UFC when Ortiz had so many losses piled in a row, and it turned out to be that one oasis in the desert of his inevitable exit of all the legends do. And I think in this case with Tony, who's also a legend in his own right, but he's got sort of that like Diaz brothers street cred with the fans at the
Mm.
moment where it's just like, we just want to see him. We just want to celebrate him. Could you imagine if that old timer, that old warrior got his hand raised against the guy in Paddy who's sometimes looked at as sort of like the UFC's next, experiment in a lab of trying to figure out who's the next marketing tool
Mm.
they can pull behind. It's an interesting matchup. But yeah, all things considered, man, I'm really fired up for this card. Yes, big picture, this has been a fun year for the UFC. I can get caught up in why is the matchmaking so watered down and why is there so much power slap on my timeline? But sometimes you got to put that stuff aside and get to what really matters, and that's the
Mm.
fights. And I'll give the UFC credit this calendar year. Big picture, main event, co-main events, pay-per-views, they've absolutely delivered.
And when we talk about the main event, Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington for the welterweight title, most people with, let's say, half a brain would say that Colby Covington meritocratically does not deserve the world title fight, coming off one win when you got Belal Muhammad, I think, on an 8 or 9 fight win streak. So, and Shavkat is obviously 17-0 with 17 stoppages. So, with that being said, Brian, why do you think this fight has been booked? Do you think it's a pay-per-view cash grab because Colby will sell the most tickets and will sell the most pay-per-views? Do you think it's maybe an attempt to get Colby Covington as champion, or is it maybe an attempt to build Leon star power in his second title defense? What do you think is the key reason for this
Well, like
matchup?
there's no shortage of fun conspiracy theories from some other writers in this space that I talk with all the time that they're like, obviously, guys, this is to get Trump back in office and the UFC title back in the White House. I don't think so. Look, here's what this is. Colby Covington in his late 30s, at the very least, meritocratically, or what I think you pronounced it correctly. Me on Morning Combat, I'm creating new words constantly. At least he's coming off a victory against Jorge Masvidal, and at least it was in a pay-per-view main event, albeit a while ago. Outside of that, though, he's here for his own star power, and I don't think it's for his own star power as a B-side necessarily to try to push this event over the top or gain, X amount of pay-per-view buys. I think it's for the latter of what you mentioned. It's to get Leon Edwards over. Leon Edwards' story has been one of the more sort of like heartwarming, wholesome stories, and I was nothing against Leon by any means, but I was just somebody who didn't pick up on his realness for a while, because this is what can happen. You can get contenders, and you can get contenders that seem overdue for a title shot due to the length of their title reign, but have they beaten the requisite guys? There were points in Leon Edwards' rise where it just didn't feel to me like I'm looking at a future champion. And certainly there were things that didn't go his way, from getting punched by Masvidal backstage, which I think hurt his street cred and brand, to some of the ways that certain fights like the Nate Diaz one, or even the Belal Muhammad one, which were meant to prove to you how great this guy is, he either didn't get the opportunity to prove that, or against Nate, the whole story was sort of, stolen by Nate rallying at the end and almost pulling it off. But once he got to the title level, good Lord, did Leon Edwards live up to that Rocky nickname and produce one of the greatest moments of all time. And for John Attic, my good friend from back in the day, arguably the greatest UFC call of all time. But the fact that he ran it back in the rematch and won it a more well-rounded way, won it a more start-to-finish solid way. Leon Edwards is deserving right now on CBS Sports, where I put together the pound-for-pound top rankings, no worse than 4th or 5th, or which is what a lot of people have him. But now you're serving him up a trash-talking villain who can fill that B-side role to, at the very least, from a big-picture business standpoint, not that the UFC is necessarily cheering for either guy, but if you want a champion to continue his street cred and grow, especially a champion who's got the UK connection there with Leon, and the fact that UFC is so actively trying to expand in that space across Europe, yeah, it's the right matchup for just that. But here's the key question on Colby, because you do have a lot of people banging on the door going like, Dana, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why is Colby in this fight? Doesn't deserve to be here. Remember, did we forget the name? Because how overdue is Belal Muhammad, just as an example, right? Or Shavkat Rakhmonov, who has a very big fight on this card and could be knocking on the door of a title shot with a win there. Timing is everything. You do have to get old school and build it the right way. And I think for Leon Edwards' overall arc, if he's going to keep winning and keep being champion, then a lot of ways this is the right fight at the right time. But is Colby Covington just that? The aging name B-side who's here to put the fight over the top? Or does he have a sneaky chance here of upsetting the apple cart? That's what I can't figure out, because there is a contingency of people that are saying, man, I actually might put money on him. This is sneaky. And you get on the flip side the same people that are saying, what a crap main event. This is a waste of our time. The truth is always in the middle. It's a little bit of all of that. But what I want to see at the end of the day is a good ass fight, a good test for Leon Edwards. Can Colby at this age do that? I don't know. We're going to find out here, but I'm not going to lie to you. I've been a little bit down on this fight, not as crazy down as everybody else, but this to me is a fight that's more like, okay, show me. Unfortunately, for my history, I've asked that of Leon a lot. To his credit of late, he continues to show. I do think this will go down if he gets the win. Critical wise is a very good one. A former title challenger, somebody who came that close in the first Usman fight to maybe pushing over the top and winning it. I just want to see from Colby, do you have extra veteran tricks up your sleeve? Have you been silently evolving your game? Or are we going to see the Colby Covington that we're used to? And this is the thing, Mike. If we see the Colby Covington that we're used to, could he push Leon? Could he be competitive? Yes. But it's tough for me to really try to figure out an extended path to victory where I have a lot of confidence that in this specific matchup at this time in his career, that Colby is here for nothing more than name value only. That's harsh. That's not really true. I'm just having a hard time in my mind figuring out how is he going to pull this off if he does on Saturday.
I feel like the thing as well with Leon's story is like he was one of those fighters for such a long time where if you typed in Leon Edwards on YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels, a lot of them would be bad moments. You think about the 5th round punch against Diaz, you think about the sucker punch against Masvidal, and he's almost become this kind of accidental star with the very wholesome speech post-fight interview after the the Usman rematch, the whole pulling the trigger in Usman's face before ahead of the trilogy fight, all of that. How big of a star do you think Leon can become? Because he is naturally a shy guy. He's not naturally that trash talker or the larger than life personality that I'll be facing him on Saturday night in Colby Covington. So, past when you think about skill sets, how big of a star can Leon actually become?
It's tough because there's limitations on everybody based on pre-existing conditions, and not everybody just has that marketing gift. Leon Edwards didn't have that marketing speaking gift, which is why when he was extending that unbeaten streak that went all the way to him winning the championship, we doubted him a lot along the way. He wasn't a great job at talking up his chances and his stock. And you mentioned there were a couple bad moments where he sat back. Is that enough of a sort of negative advantage that he had to turn back where for me to say, can he be a real star, a real crossover star? I do have questions about that because it's just not his personality. But the thing is, he is so inspirational and is so, I guess, wholesome is the word in a sport that we rarely ever bring this up, although we've had a few nice, solid, under the radar moments from Amanda Nunes retiring on her own terms after that victory to the way that she lost the title to Juliana Pena just a couple fights before. I mean, we've seen a couple times of this triumph of the human spirit and this breakout moment. Is that marketable? Well, it helps again if Leon is also part of a larger UK extended European expansion for the US. But, Leon also representing multiple nations with his Jamaican heritage and coming up through the UK. So it was almost like, they say this about Lennox Lewis in heavyweight boxing in the late 90s, at least as it pertains to him becoming a crossover star in the US, which took time. Maybe the accent, maybe the fact that he was always going up against and beating so many American heroes like Holyfield and Tyson and Riddick both through the title in the trash to avoid fighting him. But we used to say Lennox Lewis is like this great fighter without a homeland, without an army. His case was specific because he was, born in Jamaica, raised in Canada and fought for them for the Olympics, and then suddenly was representing the UK as a pro. And you're like, well, which country is it? Where's the true backing? I think to some degree that splintered nature hurts Edwards, as does the overall lack of trash talking and fighting. But he's a great fighter. And he's a much better fighter than I ever thought he was. And that happens sometimes when fighters have certain key aspects to their game that are dialed up to elite level, but sometimes it can be more situational and you need to see it. Meaning, did I think Leon Edwards was the type of fighter who could stay poised through a fight against Usman in which he was losing almost every second outside of that surprise takedown he scored, and then deliver that kick, which wasn't lucky and it was calculated? That was an eye-opener, as was, of course, as I mentioned, the well-rounded victory over Usman in the trilogy or the title rematch that really showed you what he can do. If he can add Colby Covington's name on his ledger, and if he can beat him impressively and thoroughly, I don't know. Maybe it helps that the UK's got Tom Aspinall ready, in my opinion, to fight big name fighters in soccer stadiums if Dana White and company are finally ready to go to that level. It doesn't hurt that Edwards is also part of this growing revolution. If he keeps winning, it's hard to hold back anybody from becoming a star. I mean, Anderson Silva never could talk. He still can't outside of I back. Trust me, I back. One of the greatest quotes in MMA history right there. But the point was so sublime in the cage that he won you over. There are limitations for Leon, but people do love a good story. And if Leon can continue to rise, there are hammers coming on us. And he knows very well, Shavkat among them, maybe the leader of them. You keep beating guys like that and you keep telling your inspirational story, it's going to be hard to hold you back. But, there are levels to stardom. And I think we know exactly where he's at. Cheering for him, though, seriously, as a person, as a journalist, watching somebody's personal story, he does make it hard to do anything but cheer for him. He's been in that regard a sort of welcome inspiration.
Yeah, no, 100%. You mentioned there about who could potentially next, and obviously not looking past this fight, but the featured fight features number 5 versus number 6 in Shavkat versus Wonderboy. Shavkat being the biggest favourite on the card, so it's in a lot of people's minds potentially a setup, potentially a punishment, let's say, from the Wonderboy's refusal to take the Michel Pereira fight after the missing weight. But we've also seen Belal Muhammad announced yesterday as the official backup for the UFC 296 main card. So, in your mind, who do you think is next for the winner of Edwards Covington?
Well, Bilal's getting to some extended territory here where he's just way overdue. In fact, to be very honest, this should have been Belal.
Yes.
And this just as well could have been Shavkat, even though we're really looking for Shavkat Rakhmonov to continue to add the type of names. And that's why I like this matchup, even though I have really bad hopes, not hopes, but I have really bad feelings for Stephen Thompson's future in this fight. I think a lot of people do, even though pushing 40, he's still so with it in so many key categories, especially the speed and reaction time that can be hard to do at this advanced stage, especially at welterweight and below. And we all know Luke Thomas's thoughts on his favorite stat, that it's basically impossible unless you're Tyron Woodley to win a world title at welterweight or below after 35. But I think it should be Belal next, because like, what could be the further justification outside of not giving this guy the title? And it was weird because like when Rocky Edwards got his title shot, right? I remember being that dick who was just like, okay, let's get this over with and out of the way. Right. So we can move on to the bigger names. At that point, Hamzat Chimaev was coming on as potentially the next welterweight killer. And I remember saying, you know, at that time, like, just let him cut to the front of the line. What else do you need to see than what he showed us in 2020 and then the Gilbert Burns brawl and all that? Shavkat is a different fighter in that regard, but he's coming. But Bilal's got to be first and he's got to be next. If, of course, if Leon defeats Colby Covington, or maybe altogether if Covington wins and you don't need an immediate rematch. But it's not going to be long, Mike. You know that. I know that. Luke Thomas, my partner on Morning Combat, knows that. I don't think I've ever sniffed out a bigger Shavkat Rakhmonov fan or somebody that saw this man coming from so far away. But you mentioned biggest, betting favorite. I'm not surprised. And it's like, it's weird. It's like, what else could have Wonderboy have done of late to show us how well he's maintained himself and how, you know, he doesn't talk about, oh, I'm looking to be a gatekeeper or I'm looking to make fun action old guy fights. He's still trying to climb and get back into that title picture, you know, which has eluded him outside of the 2-fight series with Woodley when he was champion. But I can't imagine this going anywhere but bad over time for Wonderboy. And this is a great opportunity and audition and close up for Shavkat, for all the crossover fans that might be buying this end of the year pay-per-view, but aren't following him on his rise. I think he's going to punch a hole in Wonderboy and really show us exactly who he is. It could make Bilal's chances more negatively interesting moving forward. But I mean, is there a comparison for, I mean, you know, Max Holloway had to hang around a long time to finally get his title shot, but he did that. We saw other guys go through. Tony Ferguson, unfortunately, you know, he finally cashed it in with that interim shot against Gaethje after being stripped of his own interim belt that he won along the way. But it's hard when these guys are going for so long. If they were in a different division, they already would have been, you know, getting the chance to fight for it. But I'm going to remember that name when it's time. If Leon Edwards it survives and advances here, let's get Belal up in the bullpen.
Yeah, no, 100%. You've asked me to start when we started about what was my most anticipated fight. Well, obviously, as I mentioned, there is some personal interest in terms of Paddy the Baddy. Paddy the Baddy makes his return, as well as Ian Garry. Two young men from my part of the world who've been involved in a lot of controversy over the last 12 months. Ian Garry a little bit more recently, and Paddy obviously with that, what he titles Hell Week of the week of 292 with all the controversy that went down. Both guys are in a funny position, in a kind of a position that I personally didn't expect them to be in at this point. So with that being said, who do you think has the better chance to get fans back on the side with the win on Saturday night?
That's the thing about us fans or journalists who have to be fans if you're going to get into this line of work. I hate when there's a separation of church and state. The only separation of church and state for me between being a fan and a journalist is don't cheer at press row, don't openly cheer and be an asshole. But we're all fans of somebody. That's why we're in this game. That's why we do this for a living, because we freaking love it. In this regard, we're fickle. Hamzat Chimaev blows weight like he did against Nate Diaz, unexplainable for huge. And what does he do? The next day he goes out there and absolutely obliterates Kevin Holland. And we're all like, okay, when can we get him fitted for a title shot? Hamzat, you pick the division, right? But what's interesting is Paddy could not be entering this fight more of, like I mentioned earlier, the whether it's true or not, the UFC created, you know, next big thing guy who's getting wins in close decisions that people think is disputed, and people are questioning his growth, and he's been out a long time and he has something to prove. But I can't remember a time where somebody like Ian Garry brought as much thunder upon themselves, whether it's his fault or not, for some of the stuff that's happened in the gym that has pissed off people, including champion Leon Edwards, who kicked him out, all the way down to the guys in Kill Cliff, Brendan Allen, who haven't had nice things. Even Sean Brady's like, oh, by the way, you bring that shit to Philly, you're going to find out. And then there's the marriage side, which, you know, we're all debating. Should we comment about? Was this the right time to look up the word cuck on Urban Dictionary and figure out what it actually meant if you didn't? I just know that they both need to shut up these outside narratives. And the only way you do that is by winning thoroughly, decisively inside the cage. The problem here if you're comparing the two in terms of who needs it more or who has a bigger chance to get it, damn, that's a tough fight with Luque for Ian Garry. This is a tough ass fight in every possible direction. But it gives him, if he passes the test in a solid, convincing fashion, it gives him so much more sort of, credit, more leverage, more all of that, because it's such a more high quality win. I want Tony Ferguson to go out there because we all don't want him to be still fighting in these type of fights. But at the same time, there's some quirkiness to the matchmaking here of Tony versus Paddy. Like, you can talk yourself into the idea of Tony surprisingly being competitive, but it's like, does it end in another stoppage bad loss for Tony Ferguson? Either way, as I teased earlier, if he gets the win and the upset here, I mean, I don't even think like the fans are going to like. It's weird when an old fighter, or maybe even in any sports, when you see an old hero like resurrect or bring it back one more time, it's almost people connect with that so deeply because it's a reminder of the potential of, second chances in life, and are all of us just, getting through each day on the levels of mediocrity and not challenging ourselves to go to the next level. Tony is always challenging himself. I'm nervous for Tony. I'm always nervous for this version of Tony, whether he's throwing up on the treadmill with David Goggins preparing for this or going in there. But Ian Garry has the bigger chance to tell all the fighters who don't like his gym etiquette to shut the hell up. Because if he goes in there and beats Luque, he's going to, from a legitimate standpoint, really be ready to make the leap to that inner circle where, yeah, we're talking about, okay, Belal needs to be next, but Shavkat's coming if he wins. Well, Ian Garry's coming too. I mean, this card in so many ways is going to define a lot of what the welterweight future is going to look like for us. Paddy can repair a lot since he's coming off long layoff and people sort of already kind of dismissing him as this, bust or was never as good as he was. But what's interesting with Paddy's situation is there's delicate layers to it. He could dominate and win and not get the credit based on how bad Tony can look right there. You know what I mean? Or if Tony has any moments.
I was about to ask that about you. Sorry to interrupt, but in Paddy's media this week, you'll probably see, because I've seen in all the media leading up, he's titled this fight a lose-lose, saying if he beats Tony, it'll be you beat a guy on a 6-fight losing streak. If he loses to Tony, God forbid. So is there a scenario where this isn't a lose-lose, where Paddy can come out in a
That's what I'm trying to figure out in my head, because I'm starting to like, you're like, okay, what about the scenario that Tony overachieves but then still loses? Is that going to take away from what Paddy does in there? Are we going to say, oh, well, you got rocked by an old Tony, right? Who's still always going to be a certain level of dangerous in game outside of the reality that the punch resistance, right, that the mileage is really overtaking him. I don't know. I mean, what if this is a great fight that Paddy dramatically wins? Is there ways we can look at that and say, man, Tony overachieved and really pushed him, but Paddy fought through, and that's the breakthrough he needs to go on the right track? It might be, but I can't, which is why this is a great question from you, really imagine a scenario in which people aren't doing just that, booing him or trying to tear down the quality of the win just because of the run Tony's been on. And UFC is either, it's funny, it's like, did they match this perfectly? And when we say that, sometimes we mean it's, wow, there could be potential for Tony's overachieving, matching up with Paddy kind of just, again, maybe not being that guy at the end of the day. Or maybe it's the perfect matchmaking because it's going to be the demolition that we all think it will be and Paddy rolling through him. But either way, the answer to your question is Paddy probably doesn't repair his brand, really, win or lose here. And it's probably going to stay the way it is until he fights a legitimate ranked guy where we're really, and the next time he fights a guy that everyone is counting him out, and even the odds makers are picking the other guy, and not like, the Jared Gordon level, no disrespect, like, not, we're talking about like the next level. That's going to be the definer. But for Paddy, I think like all news is good news. Even if he comes out of here with bad news, people will be talking about him. The attention, the spotlight is going to be on him. For now, it's just the season. He's going to have to play the hater a little bit, and people are going to put him down and boo him and say, you're this, or that. But whether it's next fight, 2 fights from now, 3 fights from now, 5 fights from now, when he finally gets in there against that legitimate guy that's going to define how real he actually is, I don't think he really repairs his reputation that was lost until that moment. Until then, he's probably going to be looked at more as the protected company guy, blah, blah, blah. And it's not fully true, but it's also kind of true. I mean, I don't really know how good Paddy is. He shows flashes of brilliance. He also shows flashes of sort of disrepair on certain technical reactions that you're like, that's not going to last a long time, right? And there's been stamina at time issues. There's been a lot of issues at time, but he's had his head down for a while preparing for this fight. So he can say lose publicly, and it's probably true. But has all this time and all this negativity fueled him to come out and destroy Tony and send a message? I don't want to see that message, but it's probably the best thing that can happen for Paddy's rise and his career and his brand moving forward. He'll still probably get booed. He'll still get downgraded, but at least when you say you're only as good as your last performance, at least he'll be going in the right direction if he gets a win here. I'll be cheering for Tony though, and I'm not hiding that. It's tough to see this guy take beatings. He's always willing to pour himself out. I would love if he could pull this upset and walk away, but you know what your reward is when you're an old fighter and you pull an upset over somebody you shouldn't be. You got to fight somebody even harder who's going to do twice as worse things to you. So good luck, Tony. We love you.
100%. And last one from me, and as always, Brian, really do appreciate your time. I don't think Ian Garry. Have you met Ian Garry?
I saw him at Kill Cliff before when we were there to interview Gilbert Burns, and he was a little colorful and showy. He had a Phoenix Suns NBA jersey with his last name on it. And there was, a lot of sort of young energy in there, but I've never met him. I don't dislike him, but this has not been a good month for him, Mike. Let's be fair.
So I've interviewed him once and I've met him a couple of times at 292 when he fought Neil Magny. He comes across to me as an extremely calculated person. Now, I'm not saying that it's a calculated move to publicly just have your wife shamed for a book that she wrote 13 years ago. I'm not saying that. When we talk about the beef at Killcliff, and when we talk certainly about the beef between Renegade and Leon Edwards, do you think the controversy that is surrounding Ian Garry, is it a calculated move from Ian to try and jump the line and potentially get that?
That's an interesting conspiracy theory, because I've seen that lately, really across all sports, when you see something happen and you get people kind of doing that same reaction of like, wait, I don't want to get fooled here in this modern day age of athletes using social media. Athletes are finally smartening up. They're realizing how to weaponize social media, right? In certain ways, whether it's public negotiations, getting advantages and trash talking and all that. This has been seemingly so negative toward him that it's hard to imagine a scenario in which this could be accurate, that he planned it. So I'm not going to go full conspiracy theory on there, but somewhere along the way, the ones that are real, and I don't mean real from the fighting sense, I mean real from the marketing sense, the ones that really get how to put themselves out there, how to get attention, how to sustain that attention, understand that thing I said earlier about Paddy, that there comes to a certain level, and Floyd Mayweather, boy, did he embrace this when he became a pay-per-view star. The idea that there's no such thing as bad publicity, and you ride everything for the intention that it gives you. You ride that all the way to the bank and you laugh, right? I do believe Ian Garry, whether the gym etiquette stuff is real or not, or all that, or the cuck stuff is real or not. I mean, I don't know. Should it matter on how I break down his fights if there's the potential that his wife's ex is still living with him? Not that it's any of my business and I should care. Or like you're saying, is some of this just brought up to bring attention? Either way, the kid can fight. And the kid is aggressively calculated, like you say. And that, unfortunately, I think has made him look like what they call an industry plant, somebody that sort of has like, oh, well, Conor did this, so let me take a little bit of that. And I didn't necessarily like after a big win so early on when Ian was sort of openly doing the Conor dance, Billy Strud, which is a nod to him, but it's also, hey guys, look at me. I'm next in line. I want to follow this great hero into, so it's very calculated, which people can smell out and look at it as fake. So where there's some elements along this way that he may have leaned into or played into, you are stretching out my earlobes here at the possibility, Mike, because a couple times I saw some of these videos and I'm like, why are these out there? Yeah. Why would he sort of willingly allow some of these behind the scenes, almost intimate things to go out there? I don't know. I mean, is it a good idea for Ian Garry right now to be talking about fighting in the Brazilian flag colors because that's his wife's heritage? Is that going to piss off a lot of people, or is that a calculated move to do exactly that, to piss off a lot of people? Either way, none of it's going to matter if he goes out there and finishes Luque. He still might get some boos because people think he's cocky or people think all these things about him. But to your point, whether it's purposeful or not, along the way, I do think he's bought into some of this. He doesn't mind the attention. In fact, it seems like Paddy that he's fueled off of it. And, I play old guy basketball, and I always talk about on my podcast that, there's two kinds of people in this world. And you find out quickly if you play mental warfare games on a basketball court. Those who play better when they're pissed off and those who play worst. And it's a line in the sand. It's white or black. It's one or the other. The people that can activate at a higher level when you piss them off, you don't poke the bear and you don't piss them off. It seems like Ian Garry is of this ilk, that it's sort of like maybe he's dealt with some negativity and people doubting him all his life, and he's always found a way to strut through it, use it as fuel. So either way, there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on him, but now is the time to put all that stuff behind and focus exactly on Luque. I just want to know, like, how much do they know each other in the past? Did they spar before?
That's exactly the question. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the depth of their relationship? And really, is Luque exactly where we need him to be after a recent health scare? Are some of these factors going to play into Ian's hands? It's going to be interesting, because if Garry loses this, people are going to act like the world ended and this guy's a bust and everybody's going to celebrate. But if he wins, I wonder, is he going to get, are they going to put Mike, are they going to throw him to the top of this division?
We will have to go, because I've got another, something to go for another call. Having said that, Brian, I did actually ask Vicente Luque that question a couple of days ago, and you can find the answer on my latest interview with him. So I will plug myself on my own channel. But nevertheless, Brian, thank you as always for your time. It's always a pleasure to break down these cards with you, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Mike. Best of continued luck. Great chatting with you, dude.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.